In January 1914, Detroit suddenly felt magnetized. People packed outside the gates of the Highland Park plant, so tightly newspapers had to describe the crowd. All for one number: $5 a day. But if you think this is a warm story about a generous boss, you miss the real point. In 1914, that 5 was not just money. It was the price of entering a new tempo, where the clock was no longer on the wall, but inside the moving line itself. Pause for a second. Just one winter earlier, on December 1, 1913, Ford switched on what much of modern industry would later copy: a moving assembly line for the whole car. In 1913, the time to build a car was squeezed from more than 12 hours down to about 93 minutes. It sounds like a triumph of engineering. On the shop floor, it was a triumph of speed. From that moment, the job stopped being build the car and became keep up with the car sliding past you, beat by beat, step by step, with no negotiation. And here's the question to keep in your head. When a system expands fast enough, who is forced to change shape first? Most answers are hidden in how Henry Ford thought about scale early on. In 1903, Ford Motor Company formed with 12 investors, 1,000 shares, and $28,000 in cash. Within months, by October 1, 1903, the company reported profit of $37,000. Those early numbers are a reminder: if you stabilize the flow, money comes looking for you. But to stabilize the flow, you have to make people part of the flow. In 1907, Ford bought roughly 130 acres in Highland Park. In 1908, the company began building a factory complex on about 60 acres. Then, in 1910, production moved there. That timeline sounds dry, but it reveals a very modern obsession. Not just making a product, but building a box large enough for products to pour out like water. Once the box is big enough, everything inside has to obey the box. In 1908, the Model T arrived, right on time for an America that was still physically rough. That same year, the United States had only about 18,000 miles of paved roads. A car that wanted to sell could not wait for roads to improve. It had to survive bad roads. And if you wanted millions of buyers, you did not only need a tough car, you needed a cheap car. In 1908, the Model T cost about $850. By 1914, the price had fallen to about $490. A price drop sounds like a gift to customers. Behind it is something else. Pressure to keep the line running faster, smoother, colder. You are thinking that is good though. Cheaper cars, everyone benefits. True, but the harder question is who pays the rest of the bill? The answer becomes obvious in 1913. When the new speed started bleeding the factory of workers. Then the $5 figure lands like a safety pin pushed into a shaking machine. On January 5, 1914, Ford announced a minimum of $5 for an 8-hour day, when the previous minimum had been $2.34 for a 9-hour day. Higher pay, fewer hours. It sounds like a labor revolution. But look at it as a calculation. If the moving line turned much of the work into something learned in 1 to 2 days, and if more than 40% of jobs required training that short, then the biggest cost was not training. The biggest cost was interruption. So Ford bought stability, bought endurance, bought the simple fact that you stayed in place, on time, at the same beat. Faster, cheaper, more consistent. Newspapers at the time even bragged about it. In 1914, Ford distributed as much as $10 million in profits to employees. But systems rarely give without taking. That same year, Ford created a unit with a gentle name, the Sociological Department. Its job was to inspect workers' lives, sometimes showing up at homes without warning, judging how you lived. Later descriptions say it ran with around 50 investigators and support staff. Meaning to earn the system's money, you did not only have to match the tempo on the factory floor. You were pulled into a standard outside the factory too, where the system wanted to make sure you would not do anything that made you slip out of its rhythm. This is the part that turns unsettling when you look from the present. Today, many people do not stand beside steel and belts, but they stand beside an invisible line. Scoreboards, targets, scheduling algorithms, cameras, logs, KPIs. The larger a system grows, the more it needs people who are easy to replace, easy to measure, easy to correct. It does not have to ask who you are. It asks whether you fit. In 1914, Ford did not just raise wages. He did something more precise. He scaled the system until workers had to adapt if they wanted to survive inside it. And once a system proves it can purchase adaptation with money, rules, and surveillance, the most dangerous question becomes, next time, what else will it demand you change in exchange for the feeling of safety? A moment ago, the $5 in 1914 looked like a reward. Pull the camera back, and it starts to look like a safety pin jammed into a machine that was shaking itself apart. After 1914, Ford did not stop at making the line run faster. Ford began making an entire industrial city run like a line. In 1917, Ford broke ground on the River Rouge complex, and by 1928 it was finished as a massive integrated plant by the standards of the era. In the 1930s, Rouge at times had more than 100,000 people working there, not in a single workshop, but in a manufacturing ecosystem where steel, glass, power, and transport were all pulled into one tempo. And once the tempo is locked, the frightening part is that the system does not need you to be brilliant. It needs you to be exact. In 1920, Ford put a giant power plant at Rouge into operation, enough to supply the whole Rouge complex and still cover about 1/3 of Highland Park demand. In 1923, a new glass plant began running, built around continuous process logic to make glass cheaper and more consistent. Then, in 1928, the Model A became the first low-priced car to use laminated safety glass. 3 dates, 3 numbers, 1 message. The system was not only building cars, it was building the conditions that would keep cars coming out. Look closer. A system that grows larger hates uncertainty more. Late steel kills the day. Flickering power kills the day. A worker walking out kills the day. So the thing Ford bought with the moving line in 1913. Ford expanded with infrastructure in the 1920s. Drag every variable into the radius of the plant. By the 1930s, Rouge ran like a city with no residents. Factory tours described a car rolling off the line every 49 seconds. Each day, workers could melt more than 1,500 tons of iron and produce around 500 tons of glass. Those numbers are not just bragging rights. They are the system telling you it has no permission to slow down, not even for a breath. No one asks if you are tired, they ask if you can keep up. To keep that tempo, the system has to care about details that sound ridiculous. In the same decade, Rouge needed a maintenance force of about 5,000 people just to keep things from breaking. Some months, the complex reportedly replaced around 3,500 mop heads simply to stay clean enough without disrupting flow. It is funny until you understand what scale does. Once you optimize everything to the edge, you start optimizing the rag. You are thinking, sure, but higher productivity means lower prices. Everyone wins. True, but not complete. In 1925, the Model T rhythm hit 9,000 to 10,000 cars a day. In that same year, the runabout price was reported around $260, low enough to pull a whole country into car culture. Then the paradox shows itself. In 1927, Ford market share dropped below 10% as the Model T aged. Rivals refreshed designs and taste moved on. Even the king of the moving line can lose on the market. But the thing that wins does not lose, the system model itself. Because the system had already outgrown Henry Ford and turned into a formula. When Ford was forced to change, the price of change was a hard break. Business accounts of the retooling describe that in 1927, Ford replaced about 15,000 machine tools and overhauled about 25,000 more. The retooling and shutdown costs were estimated around $100 million. Feel what that means. A machine so large and so tightly tuned that changing one part costs like rebuilding a city. That is when people learn a cold truth. When you build your life around the system tempo, you fear changing the tempo more than you fear being wrong. While Ford struggled, other companies copied the parts they needed. By 1929, General Motors had overtaken Ford as the leading passenger car maker in the United States. Around the same time, the idea of yearly model cycles and planned obsolescence hardened into strategy, pulling the industry into a race not for the best car, but for the fastest pace of novelty. Scale was no longer just making more. Scale was making the market move at your speed. But if we walk back to the factory gate, what remains is not only productivity and market share, it is conflict. In March 1932, after layoffs, around 4,000 to 5,000 people tied to Rouge joined a protest march later known as the Ford Hunger March. On May 26, 1937, the Battle of the Overpass erupted when Ford security attacked union organizers handing out flyers. Accounts describe 16 people injured. You can read this as a moral battle. It is also a battle over who sets the tempo. In 1926, Ford moved to a 5-day, 40-hour work week for factory workers, a milestone often framed as progress. Yet even inside that progress is mechanism. One less workday can mean one more day of consumption, one more day to become a customer of the very thing you build. And earlier, the $5 day itself was not pure automatic generosity. There are records describing the profit-sharing plan as tied to behavior, filtered through evaluations. Some accounts note that by 1915, the sociological department cost about $18,000 to operate, and eligibility for full benefits could depend on meeting standards outside the plant. The system did not only pay wages. It purchased conformity, money, discipline, habit. The surprising part is that this formula did not stay in Detroit. It migrated. In 1948, the McDonald brothers in California simplified operations into the Speedy service system, selling hamburgers for 15 cents, scaling fast enough that they had 9 outlets running that model. In 1954, Toyota described a turning point for just-in-time thinking through the supermarket concept, where a downstream process takes exactly what it needs from upstream. Then by 1962, Kanban was managed company-wide, turning production tempo into something transmitted by cards, signals, and rules. You did not need Rouge to get Rouge. You only needed a way to lock the tempo. After that, the formula learned how to cling to supply chains, where workers think they are outside the factory, but still live inside the factory rhythm. Some Toyota production system accounts note that by 1970 Kanban had spread to roughly 60% of Toyota suppliers. By 1982, figures are cited as high as about 98%, even if suppliers did not all operate identically. Meaning tempo does not just run inside one plant. It leaks outward through contractors, satellites, and smaller firms forced to optimize themselves just to avoid being pushed out of the game. Do you see the repeating shape? The more the system expands, the wider the area where you must adjust yourself. When the digital era arrives, the mechanism does not vanish. It sheds smoke and adds data. In 2020, Amazon said in its reporting that it hired 500,000 people that year and directly employed 1.3 million worldwide. In that same year, it referenced more than 200 million Prime members globally. Those numbers can sound like customer convenience. To workers, they signal something else. Tempo can be standardized at huge scale without you ever seeing a physical conveyor. And if you think it is only about full-time employees, look at platform labor. In Q1 2021, Uber reported about 3.5 million drivers and delivery people active on the platform during the period. That number does not care who you are, how long you trained, or which shop you belong to. It cares whether you are tapping the app and keeping pace. The old line forced you to stand in one place. The new line gives you the feeling of freedom, as long as you carry yourself to wherever the system needs you, on schedule. Here is the darkest turn. Once tempo is digital, it can shift by the minute, the hour, the season, without explaining itself the way 1914 had to. You just see the target creep. You just see the bonus rules change. You just feel the work stack up. And you quietly learn to adapt faster, speak less, absorb more alone. But there is still one question from the start we have not touched directly. If the system always wins by forcing everyone else to reshape themselves, then what is the one thing that can slow it down when the tempo is already running in your pocket? We have been watching one idea travel for more than a century. Ford did not only scale production. Ford scaled the system that production demanded. So here's the real question behind the $5 in 1914. Why does this keep winning, even when everyone can see the damage? The answer is not that Henry Ford was uniquely ruthless. The answer is that scale rewards whatever makes humans predictable. In early 1914, Ford tied a higher daily pay to an 8-hour day, right after the moving line cut build time from more than 12 hours to about 93 minutes. The public saw generosity. The factory saw a stabilizer. In 1913, turnover had become so extreme that Ford hired 50,448 workers just to hold an average workforce of about 13,623, roughly 370% turnover. A system that burns through people that fast has only two options: slow the system, or force the people to adapt faster. Ford chose the second. And once a system proves that it can buy adaptation, it starts doing something even more important. It starts expanding the border of work. The The sociological department did not just watch the line. Investigators could show up at a worker's home and judge habits outside the plant. That is the move. The system stops asking for your labor and starts asking for your life to stay compatible with the labor. Short sentence. No romance. Then Ford built the ultimate proof of concept at River Rouge. At its peak in the 1930s, more than 100,000 people worked there. A new car could roll off the line every 49 seconds. The complex smelted more than 1,500 tons of iron per day and made 500 tons of glass per day. It even needed a maintenance crew about 5,000 strong to keep the rhythm from breaking. This is not trivia. This is the signature of scale. When everything depends on flow, every interruption becomes an enemy. Now connect that to the moment Ford had to change the product. You are thinking, fine, but people still got cheaper cars, higher pay, shorter weeks. True, Ford helped normalize the 8-hour day and later a 5-day week, and mass production helped pull prices down across industries. The argument is real. Here is the colder reply. The benefit is not the same as the bargaining power. A system can improve living standards while still concentrating control over timing, measurement, and replacement. 3 levers. Timing, measurement, replacement. That is why this matters right now. Because the most scalable systems today are built on measurement, not the foreman with a stopwatch. The dashboard, the log, the ranking, the algorithm. In 2020, Amazon said it hired 500,000 employees and directly employed 1.3 million people worldwide with more than 200 million Prime members. In Q1 2021, Uber reported about 3.5 million active drivers and couriers on the platform. Those numbers sound like growth. For labor, they signal something else. Management logic that can be cloned across continents with almost no friction. If the system can measure you, it can standardize you. If it can standardize you, it can scale you. And if it can scale you, it can replace you. That is the modern version of the moving line. It moves through people, not metal. So what can slow it down when the tempo lives in your pocket? Usually not a personal hack. Usually not motivation, usually not willpower. It is counterpower that scales too. One form is collective bargaining. The Bessemer, Alabama vote in April 2021 ended 1,798 against unionizing and 738 in favor. According to the NLRB results announcement, that outcome does not prove workers do not want change. It proves the system knows how to defend its rhythm. Mandatory meetings, messaging everywhere, a flood of fear. A flood of incentives. The details vary. The goal stays the same. Keep the line unchallenged. Another form is law that targets classification and control. In September 2019, California AB 5 was signed into law, pushing an ABC test to limit misclassification of workers as independent contractors. In the United Kingdom, the Supreme Court decision in Uber v. Aslam was decided on the 19th of February 2021. Holding drivers were workers for purposes of key protections. And that working time counted from when drivers were logged into the app and ready to work. These are not symbolic wins. They change the unit of measurement. And when you change measurement, you change the rhythm. Europe moved on the same pressure point. In October 2024, the EU adopted Directive EU 2024-2831 on improving working conditions in platform work. Studies and policy discussions around the directive point to an estimate that about 5.5 million people could be misclassified under platform models in the EU. That number matters because the fight is often decided before it reaches a workplace. It is decided inside definitions: employee, self-employed, managed, independent. When the definition changes, the system must redesign. This is the pattern Ford accidentally revealed in 1914. The battle is never only about pay. It is about who has the right to set tempo and who has the right to audit how tempo is set. And yes, there is a second counter-argument you can hear coming. If we constrain these systems too much, costs rise, prices rise, convenience drops. That is real too. But the hidden assumption is that the only way to get convenience is to push adaptation costs downward onto workers. History does not support that as a law of nature. It supports it as a choice that repeats when workers lack leverage and measurement is one-sided. One more short sentence. Watch the asymmetry. So what is the takeaway, without turning this into a sermon? It is simple and unsettling. If a system wins by scaling faster than humans can adapt, then your only durable defense is scaling the things that protect humans. Transparent metrics, enforceable standards, collective voice, legal definitions that match reality. That is how you keep the machine from calling every problem a personal failure. Because that is the final trick of scale. It makes structural pressure feel like individual weakness. In 1913, Ford turnover was treated like worker unreliability until Ford paid to lock workers into the rhythm. In 2025, a changing algorithm can feel like you suddenly became worse at your job, even when the job quietly changed shape overnight. You already know this feeling. You just might not have named it. The mystery is not why Henry Ford did it. The mystery is why we keep acting surprised when the same logic reappears with a cleaner interface. The why now is that interfaces are getting cleaner and the logic is getting faster. If we do not build counterweights that scale, then the next $5 day will not arrive as money. It will arrive as a score, a ranking, a classification, and a set of rules you did not vote on. And the system will ask the same question it asked in 1914. Without speaking a word, will you adapt or will you be replaced?